Have you ever wondered why a man can forget the woman who bent herself into a shape to fit his desires, but never forgets the one who quietly refused to be chosen? It is because in the silent refusal lies an echo of something he cannot conquer. And what a man cannot conquer, he cannot stop remembering. She does not stand in the marketplace of attention, hoping for the highest bidder. She does not weave her worth into the fragile threads of his approval. Her presence is not a performance, but a stillness, a sovereignty. She is not in a hurry to be claimed, because she knows that what is truly rare is not rushed. A man expects pursuit, even if unspoken. He expects a woman to lean forward, to give him the gentle assurance that she will wait to be picked. But when she doesn't, his instincts recoil into confusion. The unconscious begins its restless search. Why not me? What does she see that I cannot see in myself? Carl Jung would tell you, in moments like this, the man is not merely thinking about her. He is staring into the reflection of his own shadow. The refusal awakens a wound, the deep and ancient fear of insignificance. For most men, this is intolerable. They will seek to turn the rejection into conquest, to make her choose them so they can feel whole again. But in that pursuit, something dangerous happens. He begins to respect her. Her absence, her silence, becomes a mirror he cannot escape. Every other woman who yielded too quickly now blends into a haze, but she remains distinct, outlined by the fact that she withheld what they gave freely. He does not realize it yet, but she has become an archetype in his mind, the untouchable feminine, the sovereign queen who stands on her own mountain. And perhaps you have been that woman once. Perhaps you have felt the pull to step closer, to soften your boundaries for the sake of connection. But something inside you, the wiser part, told you to stand still. You did not play the game of subtle flattery and performative availability. You simply existed in your own world, and in doing so, you created scarcity. Men are drawn to what they cannot easily categorize. A woman who does not audition for his attention forces him to look inward into the quiet corridors of his psyche. Jung called this the process of individuation, the confrontation with the unconscious. When she refuses to be chosen, she forces him to confront not just her boundaries, but his own patterns of entitlement. It is not cruelty, it is clarity. She is not punishing him for desiring her. She is protecting the sacred space of her own life. She does not need to be the character in his story because she is already the protagonist of her own. And this terrifies him more than rejection itself, that she exists beyond his narrative. The modern world will tell you to be agreeable, to adapt, to keep the peace so that you are liked. But in the deeper language of human attraction, what is liked is often forgotten. What is respected is rarely erased, and respect is not born from indulgence, it is born from restraint. You must understand, in his memory, she will not be the warm comfort he could always reach for. She will be the mystery he could never unravel. That is why he remembers her not with casual fondness, but with a subtle ache. He may try to fill that gap with others, but the silhouette of her refusal remains. And it is not because she was cold, but because she was complete, because she did not need to be chosen to feel valuable, because she did not hinge her self-worth on his affirmation. In a world where the feminine is often taught to compete for male attention, the woman who simply does not compete is a disruption. She moves through life as though her worth was decided long before he arrived, and that unsettles his. More than her beauty, more than her presence, more than her words. Jung believed that the anima, the feminine presence in a man's psyche, carries the power to awaken him to deeper truths. But when a woman refuses to be chosen, she awakens him not to romance, but to his own unpreparedness. He sees in her what he wishes he could be, whole, without needing someone to complete him. This is why his memory of her lingers. For the woman, this is not a strategy, it is a state of being. She does not play the role of the prize to be won. She embodies the reality that she is the prize, whether or not anyone recognizes it. And the irony is, this truth only becomes more vivid to him in her absence. So when you stand in your own sovereignty, when you refuse to shrink to fit the frame he offers you, you do more than protect your dignity. You create an indelible mark. You do not become a fleeting chapter in his story. You become the book he never finishes. And so his mind begins to wander back to her in quiet hours, not because she was perfect, but because she was untouchable in a way he could not define. He will try to reduce it to her beauty, her grace, her way of speaking, but deep down he knows it was something else entirely. It was the way she did not bend. For most men, attraction is a pursuit of resolution. They want to know they can have her, to close the open loop in their mind. But the woman who refuses to be chosen leaves the loop unclosed. She does not tie the story into a neat ending, and so the story refuses to die. The mind cannot stop replaying what was never fully possessed. In Jungian terms, she becomes a projection screen for his unfulfilled anima. She embodies all the things he wishes he could claim in himself: self-possession, certainty, and the freedom to walk away from what does not serve her. And because he has not yet integrated these qualities within himself, he feels their absence more acutely in her presence. Might think this means she becomes a kind of ghost in his life, and you would be right, not the ghost of loss, but the ghost of possibility, a reminder that there are people in this world who do not yield simply because they are wanted. He may speak to others about her, weaving her into conversations as if to make sense of her, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with bitterness, but each word betrays the fact that she has taken root in the architecture of his memory. He does not realize that the more he speaks of her, the more deeply he plants her in his unconscious. And here is the paradox. The very act of her not being chosen by him becomes the reason she stands apart from all the women he did choose. Every relationship after her will carry a quiet comparison, even if he never admits it. Other women may fit better into his life, but none will replicate the gravity of the one who walked away. For the woman, this is not a calculated tactic. She does not withhold to create longing. She withholds because she understands the currency of her presence. She knows that attention given too easily loses its value, and so she invests her energy as carefully as one would guard a rare jewel, not to deprive others, but to honor herself. This kind of restraint unnerves a man because it undermines the transactional rhythm he has been conditioned to expect. He cannot earn her in the usual ways, not through charm, not through persistence, not through offering the illusion of security. She forces him to confront the fact that some doors cannot be opened simply because one desires to step through them. And in that confrontation, he meets his own limits. He begins to question, why didn't she want me? What did she see that I couldn't? Was I not enough? These questions do not always lead to answers, but they do lead to a restlessness that keeps her image alive. In this way, she becomes both the wound and the cure. The wound, because her absence leaves a hollow space he cannot fill. The cure, because she unconsciously invites him to grow beyond the boy who expects women to validate him. She shows him, without teaching, that worthiness is not bestowed. It is recognized. But not every man rises to that lesson. Some will resent her, labeling her cold, difficult, unapproachable. This is the voice of the ego protecting itself from the pain of inadequacy. Jung would say that this resentment is simply the shadow lashing out, the disowned parts of himself projected onto her. Still, she does not shrink from the role her existence has played in his life. She does not carry guilt for the discomfort he feels. She knows that every human being is responsible for their own integration, their own healing. She will not dim her light to make another comfortable in his darkness, and so she continues to live, not in defiance, but in quiet alignment. She understands that the right man will not be threatened by her self-containment. He will be drawn to it, even if it takes him years to grow into the man who can stand beside her without trying to own her. Until then, she remains untouched by the need to be chosen. Her life unfolds on her terms, her days shaped by her own hands, and somewhere in the mind of a man who once thought he could win her, she exists still, not as a regret, but as the question he never answered. Over time, that question begins to take on a life of its own. It slips into his thoughts in unexpected moments, in the middle of laughter with friends, in the quiet before sleep, in the fleeting glance at someone who vaguely resembles her. It is not always conscious, not always a sharp memory. Sometimes it is only a sensation, a trace of something unfinished, something that refuses to fade. The human mind craves completion, but some encounters are not meant to be completed. Jung understood this. The psyche holds on to unresolved energies, and when a man meets a woman who will not be chosen, she becomes one of those energies. Not a chapter, but an open book without a final page. Her refusal does not stem from arrogance. It is the natural boundary of someone who knows the depth of her own soul. She recognizes that connection is not a prize to be claimed, but a meeting of equals. If that equality is absent, she will not step forward, no matter how intoxicating the attraction, no matter how much he believes he can convince her. And here is the truth that unsettles him most. She saw him. Not the version he projected, not the confident mask, but the quiet truth beneath it. She recognized the fracture lines he tried to hide, not because she wanted to exploit them, but because her intuition is her compass, and it warned her that he was not ready to stand beside her without taking something from her in the process. You see, the woman who refuses to be chosen is not rejecting love. She is rejecting the half-formed, the unready, the incomplete offers that come dressed as love but carry the weight of expectation. She refuses the role of healer disguised as partner, the role of muse disguised as possession. This is why, years later, her image still stirs something in him. Not because she was flawless, but because she was honest. She did not allow his desire to rewrite her truth. She did not abandon herself to keep him comfortable. In a world where so many people trade pieces of themselves just to be kept, she refused the bargain entirely. And in doing so, she broke an unspoken pattern. For most men, attraction follows a script: pursuit, persuasion, possession. But with her, the script fell apart. The more he reached, the more she stepped back, not out of disinterest, but out of integrity. That kind of disruption embeds itself deeply in memory. It is not merely a woman he recalls, but the shattering of an illusion he once believed about himself. His ego told him that he could always win, that his charm, persistence, or status could bend the outcome in his favor. But she was immune to that spell, not because she was untouched by attraction, but because she was untouched by the fear of losing it. That is the rarest kind of freedom, the kind that cannot be bought or bargained with. And so, in his private moments, he replays their exchanges, the way she listened without leaning in, the way she spoke without seeking his approval, the way her presence seemed whole, even when she gave him nothing beyond what she wanted to give. It was not absence, it was discipline, and discipline in the feminine is the one thing that can both humble and haunt a man. If you have ever been this woman, you know the cost. It is not always easy to walk away from attention, to let the possibility of connection dissolve into silence. There are moments when you feel the pull to give in, to soften your no into a tentative maybe, but something in you, deeper than impulse, whispers that compromising here will cost you more than it will give. And if you have ever been on the other side, you know the ache. The way her absence makes the air heavier, the way you search for echoes of her in others, the way you find yourself wondering not just about her, but about the man you were when she stood before you. Because that is the other truth. She does not just make him remember her, she makes him remember himself. Not the self he shows the world, but the one he hides, the one still seeking worth in the eyes of another. And in remembering that self, he is faced with a choice: to grow or to remain the man she walked away from. Some men will take that choice as a challenge, not to chase her again, but to confront the parts of themselves she illuminated. They will step into the quiet work of self-examination, stripping away the false armor of charm, status, and conquest, and facing the raw truth beneath. Others will resist, retreating deeper into their patterns, surrounding themselves with distractions to muffle the echo she left behind. But whether he grows or hides, she remains the turning point he does not speak of openly. She is not just the woman who walked away, She is the moment he realized that desire does not guarantee possession, that worthiness is not granted by another's acceptance, and that the feminine can be both tender and untouchable at once. Jung would say she embodies the archetype of the self, the wholeness every human longs for but often fears to meet. She is not perfect, but she is integrated enough to know what she will and will not give. This is why her no carries such weight. It does not come from woundedness or defense, but from alignment. It is not barbed with cruelty, nor softened with false hope. It is a clean boundary, and a clean boundary has a strange way of purifying the memory it leaves behind. For the woman, this refusal is not an act of superiority. It is an act of preservation. She has learned, perhaps through pain, that giving herself to someone who has not earned the right to stand beside her will cost her more than loneliness ever could. She has made peace with the solitude that comes with self-respect, and so she does not fear it. That is her quiet power. She is not driven by the terror of being alone. And here is where the dynamic takes its most unexpected turn. The man who once felt entitled to her choice begins to idealize her, not simply because she left, but because she left without malice. There was no dramatic collapse, no words meant to wound, only a steady, unshakable grace that made it impossible to hate her without hating himself. In his mind, she becomes a kind of sacred what if. What if he had been more ready? What if he had understood her worth in the moment instead of in her absence? What if he had been capable of meeting her without trying to possess her? These questions are not a sign of obsession, but of the deep psychic shift she has caused. And for the woman, she knows, without needing confirmation, that her choice has altered him in ways he may never admit. Not because she was a lesson he needed to learn, but because she was the living proof that a woman's value is not measured by the man who claims her, but by her ability to remain herself in the face of being claimed. This is why she walks differently, why she speaks without urgency, why she listens without the need to insert herself into his narrative. She has nothing to prove, and that is the rarest magnetism of all. Her presence is not a performance, not a strategy. It is simply the natural state of a woman who has decided her worth will never again be a negotiation. And he will remember her because deep down he knows he could not take that from her. The world will give him victories, admiration, even love, but it will not erase the singular fact that there was one woman who would not let him define her. It is not the absence of her affection that lingers, but the presence of her self-possession. That is the essence he cannot forget. Not her face, not her voice, but the way she existed beyond his reach without bitterness. She lived as if she had already been chosen, not by a man, but by life itself. This is the memory that ages with him. It does not fade like a crush or dissolve like infatuation. It matures into something heavier, an understanding that there are women in this world who do not need to be chosen to know they are enough. And when he sees such a woman again, he will recognize her immediately, for he has already. In doing so, she became the embodiment of a truth few live by, that solitude with self-respect is infinitely lighter than company with self-betrayal. This truth radiated from her in a way he could not describe. He might have called it confidence or independence, but those words barely touched the depth of it. What he was sensing was something older, something archetypal, the unyielding sovereignty of the feminine that refuses to exist in service to someone else's unfinished work. And so, without realizing it, he began to measure other women against her, not in the surface ways, beauty, wit, charm, but in the way they carried themselves in relation to him. Did they fold too quickly? Did they mold themselves into what he wanted without question? If they did, something in him dimmed, not because they were lacking, but because he had once glimpsed what it felt like to stand before a woman who would not bend. For her, the story continues without pause. She is not frozen in his memory as she is in his mind. She moves, grows, deepens into her own life. She loves, perhaps, but she loves on her terms. She gives, but never from a place of proving her worth. She walks into each chapter knowing she will leave it with herself intact. And because of this, no man, not even the right one, will ever be her source of identity. The strange thing is, this very independence is what makes her love, when it is given, so much more potent. It is rare, it is deliberate, it is never offered out of fear of losing someone, but only out of the desire to walk alongside them. A man who earns that place will feel it in his bones, that she could walk away at any moment, and yet she stays. That is the truest form of choice. But for the man who once thought he could choose her without being chosen in return, the memory is bittersweet. She remains the what-if that does not fade, the one in count, that forces him to face his own limitations. And perhaps, somewhere deep in his shadow, he knows it was never really about her refusing him. It was about her refusing to betray herself for anyone. And that is a truth you cannot forget. There comes a moment, often years later, when he finally understands what she represented. It is not in the middle of longing, but in the midst of his own quiet evolution. Perhaps it happens after a failure strips him bare, or after a success leaves him strangely hollow. In that moment, her face appears in memory not as an object of desire, but as a symbol. She becomes the embodiment of the life he could have lived if he had met her with more wholeness, more readiness, more truth. By then, the details of her voice, her scent, the exact shade of her eyes may have blurred. But what never fades is the feeling she carried, the calm certainty that her value did not depend on anyone else's acknowledgement. That certainty had unsettled him then. Now it humbles him. Jung would call this a confrontation with the anima in its most unyielding form. She was not the soft muse who could be molded into the contours of his needs. She was the fully formed counterpart who demanded he stand as an equal, or not at all. At the time, his ego bristled against it. Now, his soul recognizes it as truth. For her, none of this is about him anymore. She is far beyond that chapter, her life shaped by her own hands. She has walked through seasons of her own shadow work, perhaps facing her own moments of temptation to give her power away, perhaps losing and reclaiming herself more than once. But she learned early that the cost of abandoning herself is far greater than the cost of being misunderstood. And so she moves through the world untouched by the desperate need to be validated. She is not performing femininity to soothe a man's insecurity, nor softening her boundaries to fit into the mold he prefers. She has learned that love, given from a place of self-betrayal, will always turn to resentment, and she will not let resentment be the foundation of any bond she builds. The irony is, this kind of woman is often called intimidating, not because she intends to intimidate, but because her self-possession exposes the fragility in others. A man who has not faced his own shadow will see her independence as rejection. A man who has will see it as an invitation to rise, to meet her as an equal, to create something that does not depend on possession or power. She knows the difference. She can feel it in the first conversation, in the subtle shifts of tone, in the way a man's eyes either seek to claim or seek to understand. That discernment is what allows her to refuse without cruelty, to step away without drama. She is not in the business of proving her worth to someone who has already decided they cannot see it. And somewhere out there, the man who once thought her refusal was a wound against him now knows it was a mirror held to his own incompleteness. He understands, perhaps for the first time, that the most unforgettable people in our lives are not those who stayed, but those who left without losing themselves. This understanding does not make the ache go away. In fact, it sharpens it, because now he sees the truth with clarity. She did not walk away because he was unworthy as a human being. She walked away because he was unready to meet her without taking something essential from her in the process. That distinction changes everything. It means she was never his enemy, she was his turning point. And even if he never tells her, he knows, that moment altered the course of his life. He might not have become the man he is without having been refused by the woman who would not be chosen. For her, there is no need to hear this. She does not live in the echo of his growth, nor does she measure her choices by the impact they had on someone else's journey. Her path is her own, and it has led her to a place beyond needing to be remembered. And yet she is, not because she asked for it, but because wholeness leaves an imprint that longing never can. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses.